Hey there you guys, welcome back to my channel. So you've bought yourself an FF7 starter deck and you're not sure where to go from there. So I decided to make up a deck list that would kind of augment the way the FF7 deck works with the same kind of ideals and stuff, but without having to throw in every ultra rare that you can find to go in there to make it a better deck. Because there's actually a lot of really good commons and uncommons in the Final Fantasy starter set that's actually really good. So you could work with those and then we can build a deck, and that way you can kind of know where to go. And I'll also finish off the deck list by posting a way the deck could eventually evolve into, so that once you do start acquiring some of the legendary cards, you can build this fully and to the best it could possibly be. Well, in my opinion anyway. I've tried to keep the number of hero cards in this deck down to a minimum, and you'll find that there's only actually 4 cards that are heroes, so you don't have to actually buy too many boosters in order to complete the deck that I've given here. Now, I'm going to get straight into the cards here, and you'll find that there are 23 forwards, 18 backups, and 9 summons in total. So let's get on with the cards then. I'm actually going to start with the Earth cards first of all, because there's less of them, and therefore it's easier to kind of explain them. The first card that I've put in here is the rare version of Vincent, and this is because while he's not the best card in the game, he's actually very strong for his mana cost, or his crystal cost. He's a 5-drop 9k, which is the highest that you can get, printed on any card in the game, and so therefore he's worth running, or at least looking at anyway. And he has First Strike when he attacks. That's actually a really big benefit. You don't really want to block anything that has First Strike. Because of the way that damage works in this, First Strike in this is actually stronger than it is in Magic, so it's worth looking at. And he also has an S ability that kind of is thematic with the rest of the deck in the way that it works by dealing damage to one guy. So he's definitely worth looking at for this. I've also opted for 2 copies of Serafie. Serafie's actually really, really good. If you look at the video that I made that is my opinion on the best cards in the set, Serafie's an honourable mention, and she's here for a reason. Main reason for that is that, yes, she's an EX burst. The big thing to note here is that the EX bursts are optional. You don't have to play them if you don't want to, which makes her just a 2 crystal 6k beat stick, and that's really high for 2 crystals. And then you have Delita, who is also really, really, really high on the curve. He's 3 crystals and he's 9k, so that's absurdly powerful. However, you have to break something or kill one of your guys in order to play him. This actually isn't as big a deal as you think it is. In order to play a second copy of a backup, and there are a lot of searching backups in this deck, playing a Delita and killing one of them off actually means that you can play a second one. So there's actually benefits to destroying your own guys in this deck. I've also decided that here's 2 of the hero cards of the set, which is Cecil. Now, I didn't want to put Cecil in here, but he's just too good to ignore. Cecil wards your opponent's small guys from attacking you at all. He just sits there and just lets your opponent do their thing and doesn't care until he's dead. He's above the curve, he's 7k on a 3-drop guy, which is very good, and having to deal 5,000 damage to yourself in order to hit your opponent is something you really don't want to be doing. And given that the rest of this deck does damage to all of your guys as well, it's even scarier. So he had to go in here. There's only 2 copies of him though, so it won't be too hard to find. Rounding out all of the Earth forwards, I've decided to go with a single copy of Gabranth. Now, Gabranth isn't as good as a lot of legendary and hero cards, but he can steal games if you're not careful. He's a 6-drop 8k, but he has 1,000 extra power for every point of damage you've taken, so he can end up at 14k, and he has Brave if you've taken 6. A 14k Brave attacker is something that has to be dealt with a kill spell, and there's not a lot else that can do that. You have Alexander and Odin, 7-drop Odin, and they're pretty much the only things that can get rid of him at that stage. So he can be a proper turnaround if you let him. Going on to the backups now, there's a lot of FF7 characters in this deck, obviously, seeing as it's based on the starter deck, so there's 3 copies of Jessie in here. Jessie is one of the cards that you might want to destroy for Delita, so that you could play a second one, and she searches out Tifa as well as other things, and we'll get to Tifa in a bit, but she's a searcher, there's 3 of her in the deck. I went with 2 bigs because he's a 2-drop Earth backup, and that's always good. And he does actually have a lot of uses. If he wards your opponent off from destroying your backups because you can burn them for doing so, and he also has a lot of interactions with a lot of your guys, like Delita again, so that you can start burning them and doing additional damage. You could just do a lot of things with him that work really, really well. I've also gone with the 2 copies of Tama. Tama is one of the most underrated backups in the game right now. He's so good. The reason that he's good is because he can play guys during your opponent's turn. That means that while he's ready or activated, your opponent cannot safely attack you if they think that you could play a guy that's bigger than theirs when they're attacking. And that's something that's very, very powerful in this game right now, so definitely keep an eye out for Tama, and he's a common. He's so good for a common. And then I've rounded off the backups with a single copy of Mustadio. Mustadio is actually very, very good anyway. You could run him pretty much anywhere. If you're running an Earth deck, he's just solid. And because the majority of attackers, dull themselves to hit you, if you get any X-Bursts on them, you can kill the guy that hit you. And that's pretty solid. And then the reason that we've kind of gone and stuck to the Earth, other than it being part of the FF7 starter deck, is Hecaton Care, which is the only Earth summon in the deck. But this card can save your ass. There's just no two ways about it. You're running Earth, you're running this card. Backup destruction in this game is exceptionally powerful, so you just run it. Trust me, you'll love it. Okay, now we're going to go on to the Fire Guys. Now the Fire Guys are just a lot more aggro and quick, and that's what they're designed to do in this deck. And the first thing you'll notice, well, with this version of the deck, is there's no cloud in it. There's a reason for that, and we'll get to that at the end. The first thing that we're running here is 2 copies of Warrior of Light. Warrior of Light is actually quite exceptional for his cost. He's a 2-drop 5k guy that he's just really, really good. There's just nothing bad about him. He just deals a lot of damage to things that would come for you, and there's a lot of things that are 4 cost or greater, so that's going to happen fairly frequently. And being able to just pressure your opponent with him does work very well. And he's small enough that he can block Zidane, who's a threat. He's also big enough that he can get around a lot of characters just by being big enough. And then moving on to that is the big old meaty part of this deck is Tifa, both the starter version and the common version. The starter version I think is one of the best cards in the game. I think she's probably the best fire forward in the game, bar none actually. She has so much support behind her, and she has an ability that doesn't cause her to dull, which means you can use her even if she is dulled, and she does 6,000 damage to anything. That's a lot of damage to be threatening. Between her, Vincent, you've got Biggs, there's just so many things that deal damage in this deck that you just can kill any threat almost, apart from a 6 damage Gabranth. That's probably the only thing that you can't fully deal with in this deck. The common one is there mostly as fodder for the starter deck Tifa, but she's still a solid pick on her own. Another use for Delita, again, I know I keep going on about this card, but it is really good, is if you start the game with a common Tifa and just start swinging early, and then you don't want her anymore so you could play the starter one, you could make her the thing that you pay for Delita. I think that he's just a really, really good card. Then I'm running 3 copies of the common Red 13 for this pretty much the same reason as the Warrior of Light actually. Early game, he just wards your opponent right off. Having a 5k first strike guy that early, you're not going to get attacked turn 1. It just won't happen, and you can still pressure your opponent with him if you need to. Then I've gone with 2 copies of Lan, which is the other hero card in this deck, purely because in fire decks he's so good. He's so necessary right now. Anything that he could be blocked by, he'll kill, and anything that he could block would, he'll kill. He can't block guys that would kill him. Oh no, big whoop. That's not that much of a drawback, so definitely pick up some lands while you can. And the last card that I've opted for is another 9k guy, mostly because he's a 9k guy, but he does have some benefits, is the rare Orin. He's another card that will get lifted out of the deck later on, but for the time being, while you're still building up your collection from a starter deck, he's actually really good. He protects all of your backups from being destroyed as a passive effect, and he's big enough that, he's going to award some attention. So I definitely sort of keep an eye on Orin, but perhaps shift him into some other things later on. Going into the fire backups now, I'm running 3 copies of Red Mage, and that's because Red Mage is friggin' silly. Making it so that your opponent can't block in this kind of deck can win you games outright. And considering it's a 2-drop backup, its ability only costs 1 in itself, it's just really good. And you're just going to be swinging and applying pressure all day long until your opponent is dead. And you can't not run 3 of this guy. I'm also running 3 copies of Zangan because he's also stupid. You're running 5 copies of Tifa, and with Zangan out, it means that you can pretty consistently get her S ability off if you need it. It also means that you don't minus so much when you play him, even though he's a 4-drop. Between Zangan and Tifa and Jessie, you can get Tifa out whenever you want her, pretty much. You then have 2 copies of Magus, which is basically just there to deal a bit of extra damage. You could interchange this with Black Mage if you wanted to. Maybe if you want to keep the costs down. I think Magus has a slightly better effect though, so I decided to go with him. And then 1 copy of Rain, which again, like Zangan, is a searcher, and something that's worth noting for both of them is that they're both EX bursts. There's a lot of EX bursts in this deck, which is definitely something worth noting, because when you take damage, on the odd occasion you do, you're going to more than likely get something out of it, and that's definitely a plus to this deck. And then the last backup that I've decided to run can be interchanged with anything, but in the common and uncommon kind of section, I figured that Ayla Bro would work quite well in this deck, because she gives every fire forward you control plus 1k, which means that if you're against a mirror match, against something very similar, you edge them out, because the majority of your forwards are fire guys. And if Tifa's against Tifa, then it means she's not going to get killed by herself. You've got a red 13 that's 6k first strike. You have Warrior of Light that doubles to 12k rather than 10 when he hits something bigger than him. There's a lot of uses for this, but eventually you might want to shift it for something else. And then with the summons, I figured that the best thing to do with the fire summons is run a small suite of them. And I've decided to go with 2 of each of them, and that's Ifrit, Bahamut Fury, and Brynhilda. And they all deal different amounts of damage for different costs. For me, I think that Bahamut Fury is probably the weakest one, although a lot of people have argued with me saying that he's the most versatile, which is fair, and you know, we just have different opinions more than anything else. I think Brynhilda's the strongest one because you get the most for your buck, but running all 3 of them just seems like the most sensible thing to do so that you just have the right thing for the right situation. So as you can see, this deck's actually really simple. The main strategy of it is just to smash your opponent's face in. That's all you really need to do in here. However, when you get to a stage where you're starting to buy more boosters and you're starting to acquire more cards, this is how I would change the deck, as you see on my big old deck list over here. Then it changes so that there's a little bit more malleability to it. Cloud needs to be here, realistically, the Light Cloud, because he's just so powerful. And by running the Light Cloud, you need to run the Common Cloud as well, so that you have more fodder to discard for him. And to change those over, I would contemplate taking out Warrior of Light for the Common Cloud, and Aura needs to come out as well. And then you'd probably lose the Gabranth as well, so that you can kind of fit the Cloud in. You need 5 Clouds at the end of the day, there's a lot of room that needs to be changed. Vincent, I would debate changing for Prish. Prish is just the best blocker in the game unless your opponent is running Zidane. And because you're running Magus, Zidane is not a problem for you. So, you know, he is for me, he's one of my favourite characters, so don't go killing him all day long. And then I'd contemplate changing Mustadio for Shantoto. I mean, both of them are really good, but Shantoto can really punish your opponent for overextending. You might not want to run her though, because this deck encourages you to overextend. And then lastly, you kind of want to make sure that you're running a Cosmos, because Cosmos just goes in any bicolour or tricolour deck that you end up just being able to commit for any colour. And then by running Cloud as well, you just kind of get that little bit of extra push in there. So that's it for this deck list. I'm going to hopefully try and make one for the FF13 and the FF10 deck as well, so that everyone knows where they could start to go from where they've got their starter deck, maybe a couple of boosters or something like that. Something to aim for that's not like, oh my god, I need 12 legendary cards or something ridiculous. Because it's a lot to ask for a lot of people, and if people are just starting the game, let's not forget that the game has been out for 2 weeks in the UK, let alone the US. So, you know, people are going to want a springboard to jump off of. So I encourage you, if there's people out there who are like just getting into the game, share this video out. Show people the different things that they can play, because there's loads of different ways to play this game, and it's one of the things I like about it, is that it's just so malleable. Feel free to leave any comments in the comments below about, you know, whether you disagree with me on any of the cards that I've put in, maybe some of the ratios. Just let me know what you think, and then we'll see, maybe we can build something as a community together, and it'll be awesome. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys later.